welcome to another episode of Read It with Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and today we have a romantic comedy series author, Jenny Bunting. And this interview was so much fun, you guys. So let me tell you a little bit about Jenny. So Jenny started writing stories as a kid, and romance has always been her favorite. She published books, in quotations, she published books by designing construction paper covers and still has a hoard of them to this day. She's had over 30 jobs, including working at a newspaper, at a mall, as a substitute teacher, and she's currently in insurance as a claims adjuster. She loves peanut butter, just like me. She loves puns, just like me. She loves exercising and reading and brunch, just like me. And she loves IPAs, and I don't know anything about that. So that's the only thing that we don't have in common, you guys. So Jenny lives with her husband and German Shepherd, Woody, in the suburbs of Sacramento, California. And that is actually where her main book series takes place, is in California, in a made-up city called Lilyvale. So we will dive into her series, one of her novellas that she has out. We'll talk all about everything. You guys do not want to miss this. It is a really, really good episode. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to Read It with Whiskey, an interview podcast highlighting self-published authors. I am your host, Laura Juntunen. The purpose behind this podcast is to help authors grow their audience while also introducing readers to their new favorite authors. Let's get to know the person behind the page. Sit back, sip some whiskey, and lean in to these self-published authors. How about a little Laura J. Live update for you? I feel like every single episode in May is going to have a huge announcement. So last week when we talked with Scott, the Laura J. Live update was that I had released the book title for the second book in the Shockwave series. So book 1 was Transient Pulse, and last week we learned that book 2's title is Oscillation Rising. And unless you have read either the ebook, paperback, or a hardback copy of Transient Pulse, you have yet to see the cover. So that's what happened this week. This week I released the cover. The cover design was announced and published, and I shared my cover designer is linked in all of those photos that I shared on Instagram. She is incredible. Her name is Bianca, and her Instagram handle is in the podcast episode descriptions that goes with this episode. So if you want to reach her on Instagram, that's how I found her. Definitely check the link in this description here. But yes, book 2, the cover. You guys, I am floored with what Bianca has been able to do with just mere ideas that I had in my brain. So book 1, Transient Pulse, I wanted the complete destruction of the world to be evident on the cover. And if you have seen the cover, then you can see that that is very apparent. I basically told Bianca, I want our main character, Dixie, to be looking at the city falling apart. I want there to be no power, obviously, because that's the concept. All of the power is wiped out in the world, or in the area that Dixie is in. She's not sure if it's the whole world. And there's no power, so unless there is natural light, you're not going to see much. And that is exactly what she was able to give me with book 1's cover. You guys, book 2, again, just blew me away. So the idea that I gave to Bianca was Dixie is going to be looking out into a landscape, and there's going to be some type of blue force field. That's what she's going to see. And this force field is going to be surrounding a small town. I'm not going to give you much more information than that, because you're going to have to read book 2 to find out what she's actually looking at. So in the future, when I write book 3, maybe I will let you guys know exactly what she's looking at in a podcast episode. But until then, you're going to have to read book 1. The book 2 release date is not out yet, nor is a pre-order, but it's coming, you guys. I am so excited. I am just blown away with how quickly this story has come to me and how much fun I've been having with creating these characters in this world. So that is my really exciting update for you guys this week. And also, just so you guys know, my Patreon account, all of my patrons, they learn all of this information way before you guys. Oh my goodness. It's probably a month before I announce any of this stuff on the public podcast. My patrons know about it. They knew what the book title was a month before you guys. They had seen the photo of book two's cover before you guys. All of this information is given to my patrons first because they are not only supporting me through social media and reading my books and posting reviews, but they're also helping me financially through Patreon. So basically how it works is on Patreon, I have 3 different tiers. There, I always mess up the names. So there is the listener, which gets the podcast episodes early. So instead of receiving them on a Tuesday, they get the episodes early and get to listen in and be the first to jump on any type of information that I give you guys here on the podcast. So those are the listeners. And they also get all of that extra content regarding all of my works and projects as well. Listener Plus is tier 2, and they get extra episodes. You guys, this is where the meat and potato of podcasting comes in. So all of my random episodes, some video content, audio is in there, not video content, but the audio from video content is there. And I do my BIR series, my Books I Read series. So the books that I read in every single month, I create a podcast episode for the Listener Plus, and they get to hang out and listen to me talk about what books I read, which is really cool because they kind of see who I'm going to be bringing into the podcast as well. I read every single book that I interview people about. So if an author is on the podcast, I've read their book, at least one of them. With that being said, in the BIR series, you get to kind of hear the lineup of what books are coming next, and it's just really exciting. They also get some indie author behind the scenes audio content as well, and that's always juicy because it, like I said, it gives you the meat and potato of what I'm doing behind the scenes. So if you want any of that kind of stuff, Listener Plus is where to be. But the Mac Daddy of all options on Patreon is the viewer. So the viewers are people who can watch and view content. That is going to be all of the interviews I have on this podcast. They're recorded over Zoom. So the video content is available. You get to watch all of the total mess ups and screw ups that we have when we're doing our interviews. It's hilarious. And of course, I edit some of the things out for audio because there's long pauses, things like that. But you get to see all the video content, all of the photos I talk to you guys about in these episodes. All of that kind of stuff is in the viewer membership on Patreon. So how can you become a patron? How can you participate and help me grow this podcast to help more indie authors, more self-published authors? Because that is the goal, to grow other authors' readership. I want every single author on this podcast to find new readers. And I want you listeners who are readers to find your new favorite author. And I can only do that if I have new authors coming into the podcast. So that's why I set up this Patreon, is to have a way to monetarily support myself in finding these other people, in purchasing their books, in doing all of that kind of stuff. So to do that, to help me out, you can go to www.patreon.com/readitwithwhiskey. And there is a direct link in the podcast show notes. All right, that's enough talking from me. Let's get into this episode with Jenny. Hello, Jenny, and welcome to Read It with Whiskey. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you today?
I am great, and I'm super excited to talk to you today about your books. But I think we have to let everyone in on a little secret. We have a lot in common. Not only do we have the same birthday, but some of your jobs that you've had in the past, I've had in the past, and I feel like we're almost the same person in a weird way. How do you feel about that?
I'm you in 10 years. So This is what you have to look forward to. Because we're exactly 10 years apart. Because I turned 38 and you turned 28. I love 28, so I hope you have a wonderful year. It was a good year for me.
Yeah, it's starting out to be a great year. I mean, I've started the podcast, I published a book, so it's going to be great. But you've had a pretty big year as well, or last couple years, and we're going to dive into all of the different books that you have out. But before we get into that, tell our listeners, why did you decide that you had to start writing? Why did you start publishing books?
Yeah, it was just something that happened when I was a kid. I loved to read, and then I started writing. What happened, like I didn't know it at the time, but it was fan fiction. So I wrote this complete ripoff of Little Women, the movie, not the book, from 1994. It's a classic, and my grandma read, and she's like, "This is a ripoff," but we had like a home computer, and then it became my computer because I was writing on it so much. And I would always start series and never finish them. And I would publish them myself and put a little cover on them. And I called it like a publishing company had a copyright page, like it was a thing. I went to college for creative writing and always thought, oh, I would write on the side and just work a normal job until I get everything off the ground. And then I stopped writing for 12 years. And then Memorial Day of 2019, I was like, I have this manuscript. I wonder if it's any good. I'm going to read it. I read it. It wasn't very good, but I stole the idea or premise from it. And then it became my debut novel here. And that is the start of my first completed series of my whole life. So that's how that happened. But it was just always like meant to be. Everybody knew I was writing or a writer and knew it was going to happen. And I just put it on the shelf for 12 years. And I'm very glad I came back to it.
And
it's been wonderful. Yeah,
yes,
here we are.
Here we are now. I love it. And so 2019 was when you published the first book in this
2020.
series. Or 2020. So you started writing it in 2019. So
Correct.
That means there's 4 books in the series, and your 4th one just published in March 2021. So you published 4 books in 1 year, plus a novella. So yes. What was that like? Was it like you have a day job? So what was your day job, and how is it possible that you published 4 books in a year?
So I do have a day job. And I started writing the first book in 2019. And then I immediately jumped into the sequel, or the second book in the series, Hustle. It didn't have a title back then, but so I was flip-flopping between the 2 of them. So when I was on a break with one of them, I was working on the other one and going back and forth. So the first 2, I kind of had a runway, and then I basically got into a rhythm. I'm a quick writer, but I rewrite and revise a lot. So it's just one of those, being very dedicated and getting up early every day and just doing the thing, even if you don't feel like it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to slow down a little bit and make the book shorter so I can give myself a little bit of a breather, because burnout is real, and everybody should keep that in mind. But so I don't know, it just happened. I love writing, so I just do it, and it's very easy for me to do it. So there's no real good answer. Some people are slow, some people are fast. I don't know.
And when you have that passion behind you, especially 12 years of not writing, I think it was maybe just festering in you, and you were like, it's got to get out. I've got to tell these stories.
Yeah, of course. I think it was there.
So we have these 4 books in here in Lilyville is the series. And so Correct. We have Here, Hustle, Home, and Hubby. And the Hubby Correct. Is just released in March of 2021. So really quick, without giving away too much, what are each of those books about?
Sure. So it's a contemporary romantic comedy series that takes place in a fictional town of Lilyville, California, that's based off of a suburb of Sacramento, California, where I grew up. And each book has its own specific trope, but it has a love story that's contained to it. So it's interconnecting standalones. The first 3 you can read out of order, whatever one like piques your interest the most, you can start with. But the 4th one, I have recommended, Hubby, that people read the first 3 before reading that one. So here is a second chance, best man, best woman, maid of honor romance. Hustle is an enemies to lovers romance. Home is a friends to lovers roommates romance, and Hubby is a secret marriage age gap romance, and friends little sister romance. It has all the tropes Hubby does, but so that's what they're about.
Oh, so exciting. And I read Hustle, and I've also read your novella. Please Be Seated. And the novella is actually offered for free in your newsletter. So if you want to give a plug for anybody who wants to read that, tell us, what is Please Be Seated about and where can they get that book?
Okay, so it was totally a whim that this novella came about because there is a very small scene in here where the main character Zoe encounters three women in a bathroom and they give her guidance essentially, and they were just characters to thrown in to kind of steer her in the right direction. But then the wheel started turning, and one of the women, Erin, I decided to give her own novella. And then I was like, I have to write a full series off of this. So Please Be Seated is around Erin. She was jilted and left at the altar by her ex-fiance, and she is on a red eye from New York to not Los Angeles, San Francisco. And she meets a man named Landon, and it's the most bonkers flight ever. And so it's the beginning of what's going to be the Second Love Forced Proximity novella series. So the second one is, I'm writing that right now, and that is about an elevator, getting stuck in an elevator. And the third one is going to be stuck on a roller coaster.
Oh, I love it. I love the forced proximity because it's reality. Like, I was on a plane when I was finishing reading Hustle, and I was thinking back to Please Be Seated, and I was like, oh, I wish I had been reading this one while I was on the plane.
Yeah, it's a fun one to read on a plane, but it might scare you because there's things that happen on the plane in this story that are like, it's the worst flight ever. I mean, it really is, but it's also the best flight ever for Erin and Landon. So
it turns out
right. They're straight offs.
And is that one still available on your newsletter?
Yes. So as of this recording, it will be, but it will be available late June on all retailers.
Okay.
On ebook only. So it is going to be free until I release it on platforms. So as of this recording, you can still get it if you join my newsletter.
So if you're listening to this after June 2021, then go ahead and check Amazon. Right.
Or any major retailer. It's going to keep going wide. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so all of these books, you like to have them kind of like intertwined, but not so much. But with that being said, sometimes people decide to go self-publishing just for that fact, is that they want to be able to release books quickly. So then you can read them one after the other, because people like to binge read. So is that something that was motivating for you to go self-publishing versus traditional route, or what was your main motivation there?
So when I started having the genesis of the idea for what was here, I did some research, and I discovered in my research that self-publishing was not what it used to be. It had really upped its game, because when I was first writing my early 20s, it was vanity publishing, where these publishing companies were charging you to print your books for you, and then you were only able to sell it to family and friends. And there was a big stigma against it. But when I started looking into it in 2019, people were making livings, were making a lot of money, and they had control over their work. They weren't handing the rights over to a publishing company who would maybe make decisions that weren't in their best interest. And I got into Kindle Unlimited accidentally, and I read Faking Miss Right by Claire Kingsley. And it was so good. And it was very similar in tone to what I wanted to write. And so it was it. After I read that book, like, it had to happen. I was going to self-publish, and I'm impatient too. So I really just wanted it out there. I didn't want to wait 3 years.
I'm the same way. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I want it out there when I want it out there. So
totally.
I feel like all self-published authors, that's got to be one of their big motivations, is they're just a little bit of a control freak. It's okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, here we are.
Okay.
We are a little bit.
Yeah. So this book series is all based in this fiction city that you created. So what was the motivation behind creating this town and creating each of these stories? I guess we'll talk mostly about Hustle, because that's the book that I read, and we'll dive mostly into that. So if you want to kind of give a backstory of where Lilyvale came from, and then the backstory for Hustle.
Okay, so Hustle is the reason why I have a fake town, because it was originally going to be the town that I grew up in, Roseville. But I wanted to have a chamber event in Hustle, and I didn't want Roseville Chamber of Commerce to be like, why are you putting the chamber in our book, in your books? That's so weird. And so I changed it to a town. So if anybody's from the Sacramento area or Northern California, it's basically if Granite Bay, Roseville, and Fair Oaks had a baby, that's what Lilyvale is. But it is just like a mid-sized town. It does have small town vibes, but it is a suburb. And I had the idea for the first book, and then the friends just kind of filled in from there. And Hustle's genesis came from, I'm a big gym rat, and I hop around gyms a lot. And I belonged to this gym that was really nice, but I like the owner and I was like, and then he hired a girl who had red hair, and they hated each other. And then I started thinking, and that's how this book came about. So Hustle is about a very fierce female named Taylor who owns a yoga cycle studio called Cycle Yoga Love. And a new gym moves in next door, and it has this beefy redheaded man who she's just really mad that he moved in next door because she's really successful. So she thinks he's trying to like scam on her clients, and she just has like all these preconceived notions, but he's not who she thinks he is. And it goes from there. It's a lot of hijinks, a lot of flirting, slow burn. And it was a really fun book to write. It's, you know, if anybody wants to know where to start with me, I would recommend Hustle. I always recommend Hustle.
I loved it. And I have a very strong fitness background because that's what I do for my day job is I'm a gym manager and have been in fitness for years. And so to read a book about people in a gym, like fitness gym owners, you don't see that very often. So when you mentioned that you had this one, I was like, I need to read that because it's like my life.
Yeah. And I thought it would be a good place for you to start just because of the gym background. I mean, it's a very specific culture.
Yes.
And it creates a lot of competitiveness. So it's perfect for like an enemies to lovers trope setup. I love that book so much.
Yeah, the trope
even though I
perfect.
wrote it. Yeah, even though I wrote it, I'm like, I love that book. It's so good. You know, but and I had a gal who it owns the spin studio that I go to read it, and it was fun to get like her background and perspective, and I incorporated it into like revisions for the book. So it's just
and it was interesting because as I was reading it, I've worked at a bunch of different gyms, but the struggles that the owners were going through, totally legitimate. Like those are the struggles that real gym owners are going through, or people who are working in a gym. So I was like, this is spot on. I was impressed. So good work.
Oh, thanks.
It was great. And then, okay, so let's dive in a little bit more into this book specifically. We already talked about the reading order, and you said Hustle's probably one that you could start with. And then something I wanted to touch on for this is, are any of the characters based on anybody you know? You said kind of the idea was brought on from the gym that you actually went to, but are any characters, even in the whole series, brought about because of any friends, family, rivals, anything like that?
Okay, so none of the books have a direct lift from my life. So it isn't like somebody I know is placed in it.
I'm not going to give away spoilers or anything, but I like the evolution of the characters from beginning to end, not only the main characters, but the secondary characters. And I'm intrigued to see the other secondary characters who have their own books, Here, Home, and Hubby. I'm not sure which characters are going to turn up in the other books, but I'll find out when I read them. But yeah, that evolution of characters and the relationship that Malcolm and his dad go through, I really liked how that all played out.
Yeah. It just is to me, it's a very special book just because of the evolution of the characters. You have Taylor, who's the heroine, like realizing that maybe she does deserve love, even though she's been very successful in the business sphere, that she also deserves that happiness romantically. And then Malcolm does overcome some things throughout the course of the book. So it's one of those really nice to see, very heartwarming. It's funny, but it's also touching.
Yeah,
I've
there's
heard
a
from
deeper,
people that they cried.
yeah, there's a deeper level to it that I think if people have similar situations, they'll really feel like gravitated towards it and pulled into the story. Just because of the history of the characters and what they go through. And it just everything tied in so well. And I always like to tell my authors who my favorite characters are, or people who like irritate me, that kind of thing. So I will say, Taylor, she irritated me because of her decision-making process through the whole thing, but that's a credit to you because that means you did really well writing her conflict. So I really liked the struggle that she went through and just her misunderstandings in a few situations, everything transpiring afterwards, regardless of that, just like her hard-headedness, I think, got on my nerves, but in a good way. So is there any commonality in people's reviews when it comes to Taylor? Are people for Taylor, against her? Do you have any kind of like conflict that way?
Well, as far as like Taylor goes, people do like her. She's just very strong. And so somebody in a review said she was too strong. And I was like, I guess that's a compliment.
It is.
Because they're all very different. Like every heroine is so different from one another. And she's just very strong. She's had to put up this front for a long time. Creating a business from scratch is not easy. So you do have to have some gumption and some grit. So she's very protective over what she has. And if people are frustrated by that,
it's a good thing.
Sorry.
It translates in the right way though. So like I got irritated, but I mean, I really like her because I relate to her so much, because a lot of it is like, oh my God, I could totally see myself doing that. I think that's part of it, is that I saw so much of myself in her through not only just the fitness, but personality wise too, because I'm very independent. And I think it kind of, I was like, dang it, I'm irritated because this is what I would be doing right now. So I do like her, and great job on the conflict and all that kind of stuff. One of the characters I really did like, who's secondary, I don't know if she's a part in any of the other books, but the manager of Taylor is Jim Kelsey, because she had a role in the relationship, even though it wasn't like huge. And I just liked her personality and like how she evolved throughout the story as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes me really excited to hear, because I really want to give her a book so bad. And I just need like 5 more people to tell me that they like her and want her to have a book for me to write it, because I'm so close to writing it.
Oh yeah.
So close.
Do it.
Yes, because I want her and Malcolm's little brother to get together.
Oh my gosh. Can we please? Like, I will sign the petition to write that book.
Yeah. I just need 5 more people to tell me they want it, and I will write it. No,
all right.
No joke. I already know what the trope's going to be, but I just need more people saying they want it.
So anyone listening to this, for my own personal sanity, go to Jenny's Instagram and tell her to write this book. so then we can get it. I would be first in line, because I really liked her, and I want to see her have that love interest that she has helped Taylor find. So it just makes my heart warm. I love it.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite character in the entire series, or you can narrow it down to Hustle if you want, that your favorite character to specifically write, or your favorite character just as a character in herself?
That's Dan Price, baby, all day, every day. I love him. He's one of my favorites. He's a secondary character in the first 3 books, but he has his own book in the 4th book. And I love him. He is so positive and has so much love to give. And he helps everybody. And then he gets his own story at the end. And he's short. So you don't see that a lot in romance, where it's a shorter hero. He's he just has so much love to give, and he's funny, and
Mm-hmm.
his voice is very clear. I can't give him up. He's going to show up in the next full-length series because he invests in the business that's going to be central to the next series. So I just can't leave him. He's going to be with me forever. Everybody loves him.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't love him, I don't trust you. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but I love him. You can't tell me I shouldn't.
Right.
I can't help who I love.
Yes. And I did love him. I thought he was great. And I didn't know that he was in the other book. So now, I mean, I already plan on going reading the books, but now I'm excited to know that he is in the fourth book too. Because I'm not having read the first book. I'm just gonna have to read them all because now I'm just so intrigued what's gonna happen with him. Because he's a great guy. He's like the guy who's trying to help everybody. And he's like the fairy godmother. So he needs his own story. Well, he got it. I love
Yeah, he got his own story. and it's a good one. So, but his love story does happen in the background of the first 3 books. So there's scenes from like Here, Hustle, and Home that show up in Hubby, from his perspective as well as his heroine's perspective. So if you've read all of them and you read the 4th book, it'll be fun because you'll have more of like, I saw it from this angle and now I'll see it from this angle.
Oh, I like that. That's interesting. I'm excited to read those. And so something else that's interesting in reading books is I have never read a romance book on a plane before. So I'm sitting there on the plane going down to Florida, and there's like all these steamy scenes. And I was like, I've never read steamy scenes in public before. What are you doing to me, Jenny? So
and do you blush?
Yeah, I
Easily as
do.
well?
And so
Yeah.
I'm just like reading and I'm like, oh my God, is anyone reading over my shoulder? Like, this is so steamy. I loved it. So with that being said, I mean, there are love scenes in Hustle. Is it difficult for you to write those, or is it fun? Tell us about that. Because I know I follow your Instagram, so I know a little bit, but tell our readers how that process goes.
It's fun. I mean, it's fun. It when you first start, it's kind of awkward. You're like, oh my gosh. And you start thinking of everybody that's going to read it. And my mom reads my books. So she's like, it was so steamy. And I was like, what do you expect? And they've just gotten progressively worse as I've written
or better.
them, or better, depending on your perspective. It's one of those things where you want to show the characters' growth, their connection, their chemistry. So I don't put any in that are unnecessary or gratuitous. So all of them have a place or a purpose. And I love the buildup. So when you get to that scene, it's very explosive and satisfying.
Exactly.
But
that slow burn. Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, there's nothing more like satisfying than writing a really good sex scene. Know that you nailed it. Know that people are going to read it and remember your book because of that. And there's nothing like it. And to be told that they're sexy or steamy, and it was one of the good points of the novel, it's great. I love it.
Yeah.
It's
for sure.
I mean, they're not for everybody. Some people prefer more closed door or like clean romances. And
or
that's
Fade
fine.
to Black.
I read those too, but I love a good steamy time. Like, they're really good. They're really fun to read. I love them.
It was great. And I really liked the progression of the chemistry that our main characters had, because obviously there was chemistry right away, but finally going through the story, I'm not going to give away anything, but it was great. It was wonderful. Slow burn, just the way I like to read romance. And I'm not a big romance reader either. So I only read a handful of romance. I'm more of like the fantasy sci-fi. And so it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to read a romance. So it was fun.
Yeah, there's no magic in Hustle, unfortunately, except for the chemistry between the characters.
It is so great. All right. So I I would want to talk more about all of these characters in depth, but I don't want to give anything away. I want people to go and read your book. So before you leave, Read It with Whiskey would not be Read It with Whiskey without talking about whiskey. So what is your favorite whiskey to drink?
I'm a big bourbon drinker, so Bullet's always a staple. I also really like Basil Hayden's Dark Rye, is delicious, and then we do have some Whistle Pig 10-year that's really good. But yeah, I like pretty much all the styles of whiskey, and I usually drink it on the rocks, maybe 2 ice cubes or neat, depending on my mood.
Yep.
Sometimes I mix it, but not often.
Yeah.
Do you drink it neat or on the rocks, or how do you drink it?
Usually on the rocks, depending on the mood. Yeah. In the winters, I'll do it more neat because it's cold in Indiana, but usually on the rocks. That's how I like it.
That's good. That's good.
All right. So, Jenny, where can our listeners find you, find your books, and learn more about you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. So you can find me at jennybuntingbooks.com or Jenny Bunting Books, but my website is jennybuntingbooks.com. And I am on Facebook at author Jenny Bunting. As of this recording, I am still in Kindle Unlimited for maybe 5 days, and then I will be on all retailers beginning middle of May to June. So if you are a Kindle Unlimited reader and listening to this around its release date, snag the books if you would like. Join my newsletter. I offer things for free there, and I reach out to everybody every other week regarding news and behind the scenes items. And yeah, I would love to have you. Love you to read my books. So if it sounds like it's something up your alley, feel free to give me a try.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I had fun.
Oh yeah, I did too. Thank you so much for having me.
Talking with Jenny was so much fun. I learned so much about her book and the inspiration. I love her characters, the slow burn. I mean, you heard it. It was really, really fun to chat. And there were a few things that I did not get to within the interview. And one of those things was my favorite scene where Taylor has a birthday party. And let me just tell you, you've got to read this book just for this one scene. That's all I am going to say. And another thing that we didn't get to touch on in our interview was her covers. Her covers are incredible, you guys. For all 4 of her books in the Lilyvale, here in Lilyvale, in this series, all of her books are just absolutely beautiful. Her first 2 books, Here and Hustle, were designed, and then later on, Home and Hubby were designed side by side. And it's the same designer for all of these books. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Carrie March Designs. It's Kari March Designs. These covers are absolutely stunning. I feel like she really grabbed the characters and just placed them onto the cover. I don't know how to explain it because there's a lot of times where you see a cover and it doesn't translate the right way. Well, her covers really translate perfectly. So I just wanted to give a shout out to her cover designer and just talk about how beautiful they are. So that was the wrap for Jenny, and let's get into what we're going to be talking about next week. Next week, we are going to talk to Stormy Lewis, the author of the Sophie Lee trilogy. And I was so bummed because I found Stormy basically after I had already programmed out a lot of different podcast episodes. And I missed it by a few days. You guys, book 2 of her series is coming out on Friday. And I so badly wanted her to have her episode launched prior to her book launch, but I was able to squeeze her in next week. So her second book in the Sophie Lee trilogy is going to be going out on Friday. The pre-order is up now, so do not hesitate. Go ahead and grab book 1, The Key, which is the book that I actually read. I have not read book 2 yet, but I read The Key, and that's what we're going to be talking about next week. On May 18th, we're going to be talking with Stormy Lewis. So go ahead and grab her book. Her pre-order is up right now. But if you want to wait and find out what these books are about, then tune in next week and we will dive into it. I'll talk to you then.